Anyone need to use the restroom?
Hey, Chelsea, you should be happy. All I wore clothes today.
Come on up. Hi. I'm just really not used to being on this. Your folks
Makes it more serious, yeah.
You know, which side is scarier? I'm not sure.
You tell me, what do you think?
Right?
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, yeah. Kirsten. Hi.
I think you're fine. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so we'll call this December 19th, 2023 Hawaii Invasive Species Council meeting to order. It is 1:00 p.m. and we'll start by inviting Chelsea Arnott to share our meeting protocol.
Great. I'm gonna share my screen again. Aloha, thank you, chairs. Chelsea Arnott with the Hawaii Invasive Species Council and Department of Land and Natural Resources. For this meeting, I just want to go over some protocol for folks that are in the room or attending virtually. Just so everybody knows, this council meeting will be held using interactive conference technology. Council members, staff, and testifiers, and the public are able to participate in person, online via Zoom or by telephone. The public may also view the live meeting via the YouTube live stream, or it's the HISC YouTube live stream. Those who submitted testimony or indicated that they will be testifying, the chair will call on those individuals to testify after those agenda items, then open it up for any individuals that would like to testify either in the room or virtually. We kindly ask that all oral video testimony be limited to not more than 3 minutes. We ask that you identify yourself and any affiliation before speaking, but you can also choose not to do so. For all participants that are online, we kindly ask that you keep your camera off and stay muted until called upon. And if you are wanting to testify and haven't submitted testimony or indicated that earlier, you can use the raised hand function to indicate if you would like to testify if you're attending virtually, or you can, if you're in the room, just raise your hand and we'll call upon you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsea. Okay, now we'll move on to introductions, and I'll start. I'm Laura Ka'akua, Deputy Director for the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and our chair, Don Chang, has delegated me to co-chair this Invasive Species Council, and I'm very humbled to be here. And as my first meeting, I've taken on the chair responsibility, so I also welcome helpful tips and hints or just knowing looks if I'm not doing things correctly. But I got my start in conservation, removing invasive species. I spent a summer, it felt like the whole summer was just in the wetlands removing cattails. So I am happy to be still working on this really crucial topic, just in a different capacity. And I'll pass it over to our voting members of the council first for introductions.
Sounds good. Dexter Kishida, Deputy at Hawaii Department of Agriculture, and I'm the alternate representative for Chair Sharon Hurd today.
Mary Alice Evans, the interim director for the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, representing the DBED director on the council.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Matthew Carano. I am the program manager for the Department of Health Vector Control Branch. I'm representing the interests of the Department of Health. I'm here for Kathleen Ho as our deputy director. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any of our voting members online?
Hi, Tammy Lee, Deputy Director, Department of Transportation. I'm here for Ed Sniffen.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, representatives?
Aloha, Representative Ellie Cochran for the Maui representation. Mahalo.
Aloha, Kirsten Kahaloa, representing District 6 on Hawaii Island and also representing Hawaii Island as the delegate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining this morning. Next order of business will be is there others? Oh, I'm sorry. I think I might have missed Representative Martin. Rep Martin, did you want to introduce yourself? Rep Martin, we can't hear you. Oh, she might be on. Okay.
She's on mute.
She's probably fighting invasive species on the phone right now. But we thank her for being here with us as well, virtually. Okay, and anyone else who didn't get a chance to introduce themselves? Okay, moving on to approval of minutes from August 23, 2023.
Move to approve.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Representative Cochran. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I'm going to abstain just because I wasn't present. The motion passes. Thank you. Okay, next we'll move to the next agenda item, which is updates from our different departments. And it looks like we're starting off with an update from the Department of Land and Natural Resources. We have representatives here in person. So we'll start with Division of Forestry and Wildlife. Aloha.
Rob, you'd like to turn your microphone on, I think. Press the push button.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Good afternoon, council members and representatives. I am Rob Hoff here for our administrator, David Smith, to just briefly present on the division's budget priorities in the administrative budget. So our division top priority for our budget request this year was our fire program. And so we put in a significant request to cover fire response costs. So that's our staff who fight fires and the overtime involved, as well as contracts that we pay for helicopters and bulldozers, what we need to contain the fire. In addition, we do also do what we call pre-suppression, which is suppressing hazard fuels in areas so that it's easier to fight these fires when they do occur. And also restoration. So we want to look at the entire landscape and cycle of fire and try to restore areas that have been burnt with native forests that won't be replaced by invasive grasses. And we combine that into a single request for just under $7.5 million. In addition to that, there's a one-time, that's a recurring request, there's a one-time request for $10 million to modernize our current firefighting fleet. Right now, on some islands, we have Vietnam-era equipment that allows us to get across really rough terrain where most vehicles can't go, but it's very difficult to maintain the equipment like that. And so we think that a one-time shot of $10 million would allow us to get very close to where we need to be to have a modern fleet of vehicles for wildland firefighting. And finally, with the fire, there are two CIP requests, both for Maui. One is for water tanks for faster, quicker access to water when responding to fires, as well as a project that focuses in the Olovalu Malalai area, doing both both post-fire erosion control and vegetation management through partnerships there. In addition to the fire, we did have invasive species related requests in the administrative budget, $500,000 for the Hawaii Ant Lab for dealing with little fire ant and other invasive ants. Unfortunately, we didn't get anything in to increase the overall HISC budget, which I think we all know there is still a need, especially with rising costs. You know, the HISC budget really hasn't been increased for some time now, and projects are getting hit across the state by higher costs. Finally, we also have a request for $7.5 million for forest management throughout Dauphin managed lands, and that can overlap with both invasive species and fire issues as well. That's just improving capacity to do management of Dauphin lands. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Oh, yes, Mary Alice, please.
Chair, Rob, in any of your budget asks, is there provision for expanding watershed partnerships for your areas that are Mauka of urban areas that have patterns of human settlement?
Right. So that's something we've discussed recently with the recent fires on Maui in what the best way to address that is, whether it's expansion of the watershed partnerships that are more Mauka in conservation lands, Makai, into these, what frequently are the abandoned agricultural lands. And in some cases that might make sense, but we've also been discussing the concept of creating some sort of fireshed partnerships where, because the grouping of landowners is a little bit different, the land use patterns are different, and it might take a different type of partnership to make that work, but using the community wildfire protection plans and implementing them. So using kind of the watershed management model, but lower down in these areas. So we haven't made any decisions or requests related to that, but that's kind of where we are in discussions on how best to approach that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions for our speaker? Yes, Representative.
Thank you for being here. So you mentioned that you have partnerships currently in Olowalu to Ma'alaya. Who are the entities?
So I believe the Nature Conservancy is one, and then I believe there's a community group too, but I unfortunately am not familiar with all of the partnerships in that one. Scott Fretz, our Maui branch manager, is the lead on that project, and I can certainly get you the information on all of the partners. It's something that we have been talking about for many years now. This wasn't a new initiative, and it's mostly state lands where this is focused there.
Okay.
In those two areas.
Thank you. And a follow-up.
Yes.
And so not like private landowners per se?
They are looking at the whole Akupo'a down to the land, but I think most of the focus for the funding in the CIP is on the state lands. I think they are including, the coastal area too in their overall plan for that area.
Okay, good. And also I know Ikola Lindsay of the Maui Cultural Lands, which do the Kahiava wind farms up there. And I spoke to him the other day, and restoration is obviously their main priority, but the deer have been horrendous and have been having a huge negative impact. So we can restore and grow all we want, but we got the deer eating up everything.
Correct.
They've come over them, into Lahaina, literally. So that's part of this whole
That's
committee's charge.
a great
So
point. Yeah.
thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Oh, yep. Okay, Rep Martin, did you have a?
I do. I have two questions, actually. Thank you for being here today. So my first one is about the Hawaii Ant Lab budget. My understanding is that they got a super random 500,000 allocation last year from a bill I wrote, to be honest, only because Hawaii Ant Lab I saw was in my district in Waimanalo, and so I felt kind of responsible for it. And I hate to think that if it wasn't for that, they would have gotten nothing. But even with that, which was just released, they need to furlough and go down to 75% staff. And I'm getting calls from them asking about, the budget for the next year. And I just want to know, like, is DLNR taking care of them in the budget? Or is this like something that is just supposed to be a legislative perk to have little fire ant services?
No, I would say that we are definitely working, with the Ant Lab as well as Department of Agriculture to identify sources of funding, whether it's federal grants or other funds that might be currently available in our budget, so that they don't need to furlough. And Chelsea, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Chelsea our invasive species coordinators, working more directly on that, so she might have more details.
Yeah, thanks so much. Aloha, Representative Martin. Thanks for that question. So we did put a $1 million request in our departmental budget to support the Hawaii Ant Lab. We discussed with them, like, what is the need? What do you need to support the entirety of your program? And that's what they brought to us. Coming out on the other side of the governor's budget, that went to $500,000. So that's going to be coming through this legislative session, but we do know that the need is $1 million to fully support their program. And then just to follow up on what Rob was mentioning, we are looking at securing additional funds so they don't have to go on furlough, and we can support the entirety of their program moving through 2024.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's a very high priority for Oahu right now, because we don't want to be labeled infestive too late, nothing we can do about it, when there is such good treatment, right? We want to take it on, and working personally with them, with Chelsea as well, in the community, I see that they are so understaffed, like so crazy understaffed. Even if they were to stay at 100% of current staff, it is very understaffed for the responsibility that they have. I have another question, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so my other one is about Department of Education land. The DOE has a lot of land adjacent to schools that is completely unmanaged, and they just don't, they don't put any resources towards it. I think if I have the numbers right, it's like 36 parcels or something across the state. And they don't have a plan, post wildfire, they don't have a plan to change that situation. They don't have funding to change that situation. They don't have expertise. I wonder if that land could somehow fall under DLNR management, if that could somehow be wrapped up as state land. And by definition, it is adjacent to schools, which, is a huge threat to the kids. And when I talk to them about it, they just, it hasn't even hit their radar. They're so swamped with other issues that it's not something that they are planning to address.
Rob, would you like to?
I guess I would just mention that in most of the high-risk areas for fire around the state, we do have community wildfire protection plans that should include those areas and address hazards, evacuation routes, and things like that. And those areas that are in the plans, existing plans, are also available to receive funding, USDA funding, to carry out projects. Now, DLNR is happy to work with the various partners. We work with the Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization in developing these plans and assisting with grants to go through. But I don't know that I can really address whether DLNR could take over management, but we certainly are available for consultation. I don't know if...
Yeah, and Representative Martin, I definitely can't commit us to anything right here, but I can take it back. And I'm not familiar with the particular parcels, but I can look into that with you.
Yeah, I know that, you're mentioning that you partner with other organizations on land that is maybe not DLNR land. And that's a similar situation here, where it's not DLNR land, and not every parcel would be in a high fire risk area, right? Some would be in wet parts of the island and some would be in dry parts. But I was just very concerned that it's not something that rises to a priority level for them, because they have so much else on their plate. So I'd love to, to help them. They don't have the expertise. They just have no idea. Thank you. So yeah, if there's ideas how they could partner or what they could do, how they could find out if there is a wildfire management plan that includes areas around their schools so that they can tap into that, that would be a starting point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob, for your presentation.
Senator DeWitt, I see her hand up.
Oh,
She's online. You can't see them there.
Yeah, she's on my screen.
oh, Senator, yes, go ahead.
Hi, so, I want to follow up a comment that was just brought up earlier with Representative Cochran. What are you guys doing in collaboration and partnership on the access stair problem?
Okay, so DLNR is part of the task force working on access deer. They've done a population survey, which provides valuable management information. And so now they know how many deer need to be removed from the landscape to reduce the overall herd. And they're currently working on a management plan that is being reviewed internally. And I don't know what the timeline is for rolling that out to the public, but I can get back to you on that.
So I'm aware of the task force, and there's been a lot of talk on the task force. As you know, the issue started on Molokai, which it was ignored by DLNR. And then as soon as we ended up having an influx of deer on Maui, it then became apparent that we realized we had a problem as soon as the deer entered the airport. So we put the funding behind all of the infrareds as well as a reimbursement program. The reimbursement program is in effect with some of the ranchers on Maui. I want to know, how is the Hawaii Invasive Species Council working in collaboration with DOFA, in this case, Lance De Silva and John Maderas, to address this issue?
I see Chelsea coming up to assist Rob. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Yeah, aloha, Senator. I would say the Hawaiian Invasive Species Council program support staff has reviewed the action plan that was released a few months ago. It was put together with Scott Fretz, the Maui branch manager, and we've talked about bringing the action plan or some type of resolution before the council. Other than that, we haven't had much action from our council regarding access deer on this public platform that we have. But I think there's definitely an opportunity for future meetings to put something together to show a coordinated effort to manage access deer populations in Maui Nui.
So Chelsea, I think what you guys should ask for is you guys should ask for a seat on the deer task force with the county, so that way you guys can get the full picture of what's happening right now. Because what you have is you have a reimbursement program that the bill that we wrote, that the state provided funds for. And the sad part is that when the bill was drafted with the recommendations of what those funds should be used for. It was sad that at one point Scott Fritz had that monies pulled separately without the attachment of why those funds were needed, so we wouldn't be dealing with all this extra runoff and erosion that we're dealing with now. I think it would be a good idea for you guys to take a seat at that table, so that way you can understand what's happening.
Yeah, mahalo for that recommendation. I'll follow up on that, and access deer is definitely a council matter where it does intersect many different sectors and departments. So I'll follow up on that. Mahalo. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator, for that very helpful suggestion. I think that'll help us align.
I had a follow-up, you don't mind?
Yes, go ahead, Representative.
Thanks. And so, having born and raised in Lahaina and know about the fires up on the mountainsides off the Pali area, which would be your Ma'alaya, Ukumehame, even, the Waikapu, sort of, more towards Ma'alaya though. A lot of times those have been because of the winds, which sparked the Miko electrical lines up above, not near any housing or homes, but it created traffic jams and potentially, heading towards either Wailuku'e or Lahaina Uluwatu and all that. So where are you folks addressing them on that aspect of their power lines? I mean, I don't know, more, just checking them, or I know they've been doing high wind warning checks on these power lines now after the big disaster, but is there any talk about just more precautionary, measures being taken?
Right. I think part of the management that they want to do in this area is working to suppress fuels around the areas that have the power lines. So when they do arc or get blown down, it doesn't result in a rapid moving fire. A lot of the project is also focused on preventing erosion post-fire, because that situation, that area has seen a lot of fires followed by rain, followed by runoff off into the reef. And so a lot of the focus is looking to prevent erosion, knowing that, fires will, at some interval continue to occur. But as far as I know, there is no activity related directly to like moving the power lines or anything like that. It's more mitigating the risk near the power lines.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Let's go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Chair. Aloha, Rob. Just a quick follow-up. You shared kind of your budget priorities, and some of those might be in legislation. Are there any policy priority areas that may not have been covered by what you shared that help support the efforts? Because most of your focus was financial, equipment.
Right. There are a couple of minor bills that were introduced. None of them intersect with invasive species, and a lot of them were, or I believe they were all sort of cleaning up existing statutes for DOFA specific projects. And I don't have the specifics on those on hand, but I can totally get back to you if you'd like to see what our full request is.
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob. We'll move on now to Ryan O'Connell with the Division of Aquatic Resources.
Good morning. I'm here to give updates related to invasive species for the Division of Aquatic Resources. One of the first things we would like to touch upon is VIDA, the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. This is at the federal level, and while we are, this is kind of regarding one of the primary vectors of aquatic invasive species, and those vectors would be ballast water and hull fouling. These are how some of the invasive species in our waters come to Hawaii. We recently submitted a letter to EPA regarding their supplemental notice. Some of the things that we mentioned in the supplemental notice was that the EPA failed to conduct adequate outreach with underserved communities, especially Native Hawaiian or Pacific communities. It also proposed regulations that do not protect coral reefs as critical infrastructure, proposed regulations that allow the in-water cleaning or microfouling on vessel hulls and niche areas, and proposed regulations failed to be as stringent as the 2013 vessel general permit. The EPA also failed to perform an adequate analysis of best available technology for ballast water management. This letter that we sent was in collaboration with other entities, including the All Islands Committee from the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force and 3 West Coast states, including California, Oregon, and Washington. Like I said, we sent our own letter, but everybody kind of worked together on the letter, and they kind of sent it out on their own for those states or territories, commonwealths, whatever they may be. In addition, I think so there was some collaboration in the All Islands Committee at the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force to send a joint letter with the concerns related to VIDA. Another aquatic invasive species subject that I'd like to touch on is Pearl Harbor. There has been numerous non-native occurrences in Pearl Harbor, one of them being a soft coral, Eunomia, and there's another soft coral, Capanella, along with some fish, angelfish, that is not native to Hawaii. One of the primary suspect vectors, I think so in this case, is aquarium releases. So state along with other federal partners have been trying to figure out how we can deal with this, trying to find money to address these concerns within Pearl Harbor. And one of the last things I wanted to touch on was some invasive species issues going on in Papahanaumokuakea, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. There's this invasive algae that is proliferating in the northern islands. Pearl and Hermes started at Pearl and Hermes, then we got Midway, then moved to Cure. And this algae is kind of overtaking some of the reefs. But the thing about it is it doesn't exist in the main Hawaiian Islands down here, but activities that could introduce it to the main Hawaiian Islands that we have been spending a lot of time trying to regulate, and that is the removal of marine debris, in particular nets. The nets in these areas can have chondria on them, and when they bring the nets down to the main 8, they could probably bring the chondria down with them to the main 8, and we could have problems on here. So it's been we have been spending a lot of time with our federal partners trying to conduct best management practices to achieve bringing nets down, but preventing this invasive algae from getting down to the main 8. And in relation to legislative bills, we do not have any legislative bills related to aquatic invasive species at this time. So I'll close with that and open it up for questions.
Questions? I have one, which is are the nets the source of the invasive algae?
Nobody know. Like, yeah, like could have, like, the nets could have had the algae on it and then came from someplace else and came over there. Could be, but nobody really knows the source. But that's one of the, I guess you could say.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Representative Martin?
Thank you. So my son actually works on that project, collecting the marine debris in Papahanaumokuakea, and that has made me think about trying to regulate. I realize it's an international issue, not a state issue, because the nets are largely coming from Asia, the Asian fishing industry. But is that something that DAR has thought about working on, or advocating for in a national or international arena, to not have their garbage end up on our reefs?
I don't know, but that is something I will mention. I know we do coordinate with some of our other partners in some other stuff, like I mentioned earlier with the Vita thing. But a lot of these this marine debris comes from places where I anticipate we do not have such good relationships with, as far as coordinating and such. Yeah, if you could, kind of understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I do think it would just be a matter of Hawaii advocating to, up the chain. And if that's something that is of interest to DAR, I'd love to work with you folks on that.
Okay, I'll take that note down and run it up my chain. Thank you, Rep. Martin.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. We can move on then to Dexter Kishida from the Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Sharon. The Department of Agriculture has a few bills that in our administrative package, some relating to agricultural loans, reducing and setting fixed interest rates there, relating to replacing some of the representatives on the pesticide committee. Also, a bill to relating to strategic planning to increase food production and food security. And finally, we are moving forward with the Chapter 72 administrative rule revisions, planning for late January public hearing date. So one correction in the agenda may be that the date in late January will be the public hearing date. And so there'll be a notice in the next week or so. That is all.
Thank you. Questions for Dexter? Okay, hearing none, moving on to Matt Carano, the Department of Health.
Thank you, Chair. The Department of Health doesn't have any major or new legislative proposals from a budgetary standpoint. From a policy standpoint, the vector control program that I'm the program manager for is going to be proposing an LP for a slight clarification and change into the primary kind of statutory authorities that are invoked in our programs. The 322 is about nuisances and abatement of nuisances, and it's really a long history coming from Kingdom era law. And it it broadly directs to health, being able to abate, excuse me, issues that are relevant to health. In the proposal, it's a very small change to go to public and environmental in front of health, to better clarify the role and the policies of the Department of Health, as recognizing environmental health is directly linked to wellness, period, as well as public health, and the need for the agency to be acting on behalf of public health. So thank you for that. Any questions?
Okay, seeing none. Are there any other updates from council members for policies or legislative requests related to invasive species and biosecurity? No? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this agenda item? Seeing none, we can move on.
Chair, could we go back? Was notified that the voting members are departments, and so we may need to re-approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Our legislative folks are advisors and non-voting members.
Okay,
So
sure.
if we could retake that vote.
Okay, we're moving back in the agenda very quickly to approval of the minutes from the August 23rd, 2023 meeting. And so out of the voting members of the commission, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and then I will be abstaining as I was not present. And I believe we still have Tammy, Lee.
We have quorum here. So
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great, motion passes. Thank you for keeping us honest and catching that. Okay, and now that our minutes are officially approved, we're moving on to agenda item 5, which is an action item. Submittal requesting HISC program staff to develop a biosecurity and invasive species legislative package for tracking and coordination purposes during the 2024 legislative session, and to submit his specific testimony. Chelsea, would you like to summarize?
Yeah, mahalo chairs, council members, legislative members, Chelsea Arnott with HISC and Department of Land and Natural Resources. This submittal and the recommendation is just a formality. HISC support staff has been doing this for the last few years, tracking invasive species and biosecurity related legislation during the session. This is just a formality of putting it before the council, especially we have quite a few members on here, and just making the council aware of the program supports activities. So with this submittal and the recommendation, we're looking at taking some of the updates that were presented to you by the departments and putting those into a biosecurity invasive species related legislative package, just meaning we'll post those legislation and bills up on our website, and we can inform council members when those bills are scheduled for a hearing. And if a bill requires, maybe there's HISC specific testimony that's necessary, we can submit that for those bills moving forward.
Thank you, Chelsea. Do we have any questions for Chelsea? Okay, any discussion? Okay, we'll open for testimony. We didn't receive any testimony for this item. Okay, and so the staff recommendation to move this forward, do we have a motion to recommend?
Move that the invasive species supports program support staff include budget requests, legislative requests presented in item 4, and other related policies in a 2024 biosecurity invasive species legislative package for tracking purposes, inform HISC departments of upcoming hearings, and submit HISC-specific testimony as long as this does not conflict with the council's department's testimony.
Okay, thank you for that motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, the motion passes. Thank you, Chelsea. Moving on to agenda item number 6, presentation from the Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command Hawaii on invasive corals discovered in the Pearl Harbor area and ongoing management efforts. I believe we have Kevin Lino and Nicole Olmsted from NAVFAC Hawaii. Welcome. Thank you
Hello,
for
this-
being here.
Thank you. This is Kevin Lino with NAVFAC Pacific. Nicole is not able to reach us at this time, but I have a few slides that we could share. Sent them to Chelsea ahead of time, and give me one moment and I will get that going. Are you able to see the slides?
We can. It might be larger if you went to like view slideshow, but we can see them.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. My name is Kevin Lino with NAVFAC Pacific. I work with the Engineering Systems Command, and we help support different installations and facilities throughout the Pacific. A lot of the time we work with mitigation and consultation for a lot of different military actions. So one of our projects led us to find in 2020 an unidentified, at that time, unidentified soft coral, which was later identified as a Zenid species, and then through research and genetic identification was later identified as Eunomia stolonifera. It was originally documented that it was within about 9 acres in 2020, estimated to be. Through further research and evaluation, that area is actually currently believed to be closer to about 83 acres that this species has been able to proliferate within Pearl Harbor. We have been, since 2020, we have been collaborating and reaching out with multiple partners and agencies. We've been coordinating through CGAPs in order to have a biweekly meeting and to develop a management plan with a lot of different other agencies, the state, federal partners, NGOs, universities, institutions, Bishop Museum, all of the experts that we have on island and off island have been collaborating to work on this. In the process of mapping out the area that has been impacted, we've found other multiple species. As Ryan had also mentioned, there's a second species, Capnella. Both Eunomia and Capnella are very popular aquarium species that very often overtake aquarium trade tanks. And so we've combined with finding those in the same area together, as well as finding a couple other species after closer investigation, which are a much smaller, make up a much smaller area of a corallomorph, angelfish. We are very inclined to believe that this is all from aquarium release. We have protocols for ballast water and other things for the Navy, and also just the biology of these species and the diversity of all those species tends to find it very difficult that they would be able to survive either on a hull or through a ballast in order to be released and in the same area. So since identification, we have been working to have contracted divers working in Pearl Harbor because it is a national security area, active harbor with a lot of assets and other concerns and regulations. We've also been working with other dive units to try to get them in the water as well. We currently have divers working. They just completed a first 2-week manual removal effort as the species has very low abundance, but it has spread to the west side of Pearl Harbor near the Capilina area. And so we are targeting that area to work back towards the point of introduction, which is near the Hickam Fishing Pier, where we believe there's at least 1 or 2 introductions from aquarium trade, given the amount of species we have in the locations that we have. And as we're having divers out, we're getting regular information. We are also working and trying to collaborate with other areas that have a very similar problem. Eunomia was purposefully released in Venezuela for the aquarium trade to where it has become quite prolific, covering millions of acres of coastline there. And so also trying to work with the lessons learned and the information to prevent such similar results for Hawaii. We do have a benefit that we are still trying to understand of that, even though the species is spreading quite rapidly and we do not know how long it has been there, we estimate, at least prior since 2020, with given the rate of fragmentation spread, probably close to 10 years or more. But again, those would just be estimates. But we do have biogeographic features of Pearl Harbor that have prevented it from getting outside of Pearl Harbor and onto the reefs on the south shore of Oahu, from all the surveys that we've done so far, and that we'll continue to conduct in order to keep tracking and trying to eliminate and prevent that from happening. And that those features include some old wharf structures, as well as the natural water movement and cycles that we're also tracking within Pearl Harbor. That is, this species, when it fragments, it is negatively buoyant, so it sinks to the bottom. And with a dredged harbor in Pearl Harbor, that would move it further into the harbor, typically with the freshwater outflow going outward. So far we have a designated area that we are targeting and working on. Some of the techniques that we're using to eradicate all of the species are smothering, which is preventing the species from having any oxygenation, and therefore killing all of the species. And so we're doing that on a lot of the piles. We are wrapping them and monitoring them. We'll be using some tarping and other tarping materials with sandbags weighted down to also smother them that way. And then also in the areas where it's loose sediment, we are doing manual removal collection and preventing it from spreading. The other species will also be, the other benthic species will also be eliminated this way through manual collection and or smothering. The fish species that were identified is one pair of angelfish that will either be, that we are still working to capture, that will either be captured alive and taken to ideally Bishop Museum, where they could have a display for invasive species, highlighting this until that species, until those samples essentially die, and then they would become part of the collection at Bishop Museum. We're, as I said, we've partnered with them. They have a lot of outreach and education materials. The state is also putting out a lot of education materials and alerts. We are working with the University of Hawaii for genetics. We are working with Bishop Museum also in the state for collecting those samples and getting them to Dr. Rob Tunin's lab for genetic analysis. And we're also pursuing additional monitoring, genetics, and eDNA analysis to help with the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center at NOAA as well. So we have multiple Navy dive units that are also participating and assisting. And so here's a few other pictures. And also this is a website from Bishop Museum that they were able to generate for all aquatic invasive species in Hawaii. So it is a very useful tool and page for getting information out and sharing. And it links to a lot of the other agencies and a lot of helpful information for those perhaps saying having an aquarium that didn't realize they had illegal species in Hawaii, where they could have amnesty and be able to submit them or turn them in and not release them. And here you can see some of the fragmentation. And so if it has a chance to colonize on any hard substrate, it will. Otherwise, loose substrate, It does not remain very well. We've also done lab trials at the Navy where we've done lethality tests to see what type of best management practices can be most beneficial. So we've done freshwater soaks as well as desiccation trials. And so we write those into our best management practices for anyone working or operating in the area, so it's not spread further throughout Pearl Harbor or any other vessels that may be outside of Pearl Harbor. And as I mentioned, there are a few other species that we found in the area. Capnella spicata is another type of soft coral, also called Canadian tree coral, very popular in aquariums. That is a much smaller area. We have a hammer coral, which is an LPS coral or a large polyp stony coral. And so we've only seen 1 or 2 colonies of that. So we're going to get those samples and get them to Bishop Museum so they can go into their collection, as it's the first time it's ever been sampled there. The corallomorph is an unidentified corallomorph that we are working to sample. Corallomorphs are extremely difficult when it comes to genetics. Getting identification will be difficult, but we're working with a lot of different agencies, institutions. And the gold spotted angelfish that we have here, as I said, we're trying to collect it. There was another aquarium trade species that was seen elsewhere outside of the impact area off Ford Island, which is a type of anemone that's very small. And so that another effort through NAFAC Hawaii, which is some of my counterparts that work directly out in the installation, are working on the management of that species. As well as during this time, we are also trying to coordinate a management plan with rapid response plan for Pearl Harbor overall. And lots of partners, a lot of help, a lot of assistance going into this. The Navy has been trying to secure as much funds as possible in order to continue to prevent the spread as well as eradication, to knock these species back as much as possible, if not fully eradicate. We are seeking grants and other funds and working with our partners as much as possible in order to ensure that we continue to have all that we need to try to tackle this severe threat of anomia before it could possibly get out into the rest of Hawaii. And so that is a brief overview. I can open it up to any questions.
Questions? Okay, well, we really appreciate your presentation, and my question is whether you would be willing to join us maybe for quarterly updates, just so we can stay in the loop on your progress as you hopefully are able to cut back the acreage significantly on the amount that's affected within Pearl Harbor. Is that something you would be able to do? Maybe join us for 4 meetings a year just to provide quarterly updates, or you could even provide it in summary written form if you weren't able to attend.
Sure. As I'm just a representative of the Navy, I'll of course have to run that through my command and ensure that we have the right personnel there, whether it's Nicole, myself, or someone else. We are presenting at the CGAPS quarterly meetings, and we have CGAPS coordinated meetings every 2 weeks as well, with where we're tracking notes. So we can also try to loop in CGAPS updates for you as well, or also just give another presentation at these committee meetings as well. So yeah, I will take that as an action item and work with Chelsea on that and ensure that we have the right personnel there for these regular updates or providing a written update.
Sure, I do have one more question.
Sure.
Mr. Lino, is there any public outreach campaign on this to help prevent any future introduction of aquarium species to be at Pearl Harbor or elsewhere?
Sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That is a very large part of this, is for future prevention. So on the installation itself, there is multiple outreach for military personnel, families, guests, through the MRC program, where there's video, there's command rules and updates. The commanding officer of the installation has also changed several of the on-base rules in order to reflect the similar policies of the state. and to be in coherence with that. And so we have on-base information. As I mentioned, Bishop Museum has generated an entire website for it that is very useful and a helpful outreach tool. They are developing actual display for dealing with, for presenting on these type of aquatic invasive species that we just toured recently, to see where they're seeking funds in order to have that space dedicated specifically for additional outreach. The state has just completed a flyer that they're circulating about reporting it. And so we have had several press releases as well. We've also been meeting with community boards that are impacted, like out on Eva on the Capilina side of things, where we've had to shut down the lagoon from any fishing or other activities, including a popular kayak route. So we've been meeting with the public as well as in our public affairs offices meeting, but it's nowhere near enough. I agree that there should be a lot more information shared. A lot of people don't even realize what is illegal or not illegal in aquariums in Hawaii, or what you could bring or not bring to the state. And so I do think that even bigger efforts can be conducted. And so we bring that up within our biweekly CGAPS meeting with our other partners that can hopefully take that on, and several are seeking to do that to increase the amount of outreach and education for future prevention.
Thank you. I'd like to offer that the Hawaii Department of Ag would love to partner on maybe a larger amnesty program where we can do a week or a really concerted effort for all invasive, be it an iguana in Waimanalo or coral from the aquarium trade, to have it turned in, no questions asked. So if we can partner and do this larger, maybe we can reach a larger audience as well.
Yes, the Navy would be interested in working on that with you. And also there is also Waikiki Aquarium has put out a press release with that information as well. And we also point out that we're very appreciative through our working group. There was some Eunomia that was being sold, grown and sold on island, that the Department of Ag has been able to help confiscate, and that we are informed through our working group that getting the information out was very useful, and help eliminate some of the possible introductions in the future.
Very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Chair.
Dexter. Representative?
Thank you, Chair. One quick follow-up question, and I want to make sure I understand this. Is the goal of your work or the military to be able to eradicate some of these invasive species, or what level of eradication do we understand can happen? Can we fully remove these? What is our goal? And is it being fully funded until we reach that goal? Or what does that funding source or the longevity of that funding source look like? Understanding the invasive species plan that you have now.
Sure. So multiple answers to that, may take me a moment, but we have the goal. Well, we're developing an adaptive management plan with the goal of eradication for these species. That is our ultimate goal. The reality is that species like this, there is not a lot of success stories of any of them being fully ever eradicated. So the adaptive management plan takes into the realization that we may just have to turn this into a management action in the future if eradication is not possible. So starting off with the most lofty of goals of full eradication, given that what these species could do, but with the reality that there may be something a bit lesser where management will actually be the long-term solution. So we are working with that with our partners. They are very difficult. We do think that very likely at least 2 or 3 of the species we should actually be able to eradicate, given their the amount of size that they are taking up. And actually one of the other, Eunomia, is essentially overgrowing everything. So it's actually keeping some of those other species in check as well. So they should be a little bit more easily managed. And so our current funding, what originally started the majority of this funding was a mitigation action for some Navy construction within Pearl Harbor. And so that is the spearhead that initially brought myself into the conversation to start this and to start the planning, the communication with all the other agencies and elsewhere. There is what the INRIMP, the Integrated Resource Management Plan, that all military installations have, that has also been seeking funds since 2020 of when it was first reported, and continue to seek funds for the long-term management of all invasive species within Pearl Harbor. And so we are seeking funds that way as well. We are also assisting other agencies in getting grants that can help assist. But the Navy is committed to eradication as our foremost objective. And we'll continue to adapt as we learn more and see what is most successful and how well we can reduce the acreage.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any public testimony?
Aloha. Thanks so much, Kevin. Christy Martin with Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. We've been lucky enough to be able to work with Kevin and his team to try to wrap our heads and our hands around this. We facilitate the technical advisory group that tries to inform this work. Of course, because it's in a military harbor, we can't get into the water to see it. And a lot of the participants of this group would like to be able to go and do this work. And we're still working, I think, with a lot of hands tied behind our back. So I can say things a little bit freer than Kevin can, and Kevin will probably be cringing right now. But honestly, there's 5 things I wanted to mention. We're at very limited capacity. Kevin is 100% tasked, and all of the civilian staff don't have any more time. And any time that they take away, even to meet with us, is time that they're not spending with the contractors trying to figure out all of the pieces to move this on. We need more funding to get a few more staff for them, but also to either get more contractors or be able to get the staff in the water, even just get more military staff to do this work. We're borrowing people from the Navy dive locker to go and wrap those pier pilings so that the vessels that tie up there don't get invaded and carried out as biofouling. We're ultimately bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? You heard we're doing tarps. And while that may be great for whatever, a lot of the 80%, 80 acres that we have, that's a lot of tarping, a lot of sandbags, and a lot of work. And it may be successful, but we're going to need more things. We're going to need more tools. There's a lot of people that have suggested different tools, but we can't seem to be able to figure out how do we get those here and tested. And so when Kevin said they're applying for a bunch of grants, we all are. We haven't been successful yet. And so I think what we need is some help making sure that the top leadership that's involved with funding work on the base is the one to tell you what funding is going to go towards this, and what we can try, what we can bring from outside and figure out how to use it. I guess, this could possibly be a wider issue. People are saying, well, maybe there's people dumping aquariums all over. Maybe this isn't really a DoD issue. Maybe it's so widespread, but honestly, there's a lot of agencies out there that are doing surveys, and we will check with them to see how widespread this is. But it is definitely a joint base issue. We've got a number of different aquarium species there, and they are doing what they can to address this and address that with their people that move in and out. I can't imagine this was somebody that was a non-DOD enlisted person that brought their things to Joint Base and dumped it there. And so it is an issue. I think they are working on a number of things to try to address that. And I guess the last thing I wanted to end with is that, yes, we need to do a lot of outreach. We need to do a lot more outreach. It's been difficult for Kevin to say what he needs to say when he needs to say it. He has to check with command. They have to get clearance and all of this stuff. And it's only recently become, I guess, understandable to us that one of the points of the technical advisory group is so that we have the information to be able to share that with folks like you, and that we can talk to our legislators. We can talk to people where we can help raise capacity. So I just appreciate this opportunity and hope that we can figure out some ways that we can actually achieve that goal. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions for our testifier? Thank you. Any other public testimony? Okay, thank you. We're moving on then to agenda item number 7, informational presentation from the University of Hawaii. And I think we have Clay here. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, council members and representatives. And I apologize if anybody's seen these slides in this talk. I've been kind of talking about this quite a bit lately. So I'm going to just try to make the connection between fire and non-native species. It's pretty apparent, and it doesn't take a lot to really technical science to understand the connection. But the other thing is I want to talk a little bit about frame this in the sense of the space, the kind of land area that we need to deal with here in Hawaii, and also just what are the sort of historical drivers that have kind of brought us to the position we find ourselves in with respect to fire risk and weeds. And so this is some of my work from kind of years ago we've been updating, but this pulls together a long-term history going back to 1904 of total area burned per year. So going back over the past century and a bit. And so you can see that we kind of run off this cliff as we get in the past several decades. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about, is why we're kind of seeing this big jump. And so we're kind of gone from an average of 5,000 acres burned per year to about 20,000. And you can see it's up and down because we've got wet years and dry years. And so this it varies year to year. We're primarily, those of us that work on fires, including partners of the Division of Forestry and Wildlife and the university, really been thinking about the kind of impacts of Mauka on native ecosystems. So our ecosystems don't recover from fire, and this is highly, highly related to the interaction with weeds. So weeds come in after and really transform these systems after they burn. And we see, just irreplaceable loss. This is a willy forest on the west side of Oahu that will not, come back in our lifetimes. And the areas that are, we're going to require like heavy duty intervention, restoration. And then of course, when you expose all those soils, you also have subsequent impacts to the marine ecosystems as well. But obviously with the Maui fires, we're much more focused, and I think rightly so, on the impacts to our communities, right, and the threat that these fires pose. And so this is sort of a new era for all of us to be thinking about how do we deal with this and the need and urgency to deal with this. And obviously not something to be taken lightly. Just a real quick here, I give this thing all the time, but there's 3 real big drivers of fire. Fire regimes are kind of the patterns of fire you see across the landscape. And so you need the right climate. So we have obviously our dry sides and our wet sides, but more importantly than that is the wet and dry cycles. So we get drought on our even windward coasts. In fact, the reason we have a fire history going back to 1904 because there was a giant fire on the Hamakua coast on Big Island. So even our windward sides can be susceptible. But really the thing that hammers us is the wet cycles allow all the grass to grow, kind of like what we're seeing right now. And then when they dry out and cure, the fuels are all ready to burn. And ignitions, this is really intimately connected to people. So that is basically weekly ignitions for about 15 years, and you can just see it's constant. There's wildfire ignitions happening all the time, all the time. It's only about 5% of those that become these big fires that have the impact we're seeing, but this is like a constant threat due to human activity. And then this big issue with non-native unmanaged grasslands and shrublands. So the change in our landscape and the vegetation, and really, this is important to understand these factors because there's only one that's within our direct control, and that's vegetation management, right? So sort of reducing the risk of fire in the larger landscape. And ignitions, we can tackle that through public outreach. Not a lot you can do about weather, right? At least locally. So these Hawaiian fire regimes are changing when these, what we're talking about in these unmanaged grasslands are these sort of non-native dominated. So you've got a mix of grasses, African grasses and shrubs. And for us in Hawaii, when they burn, this is, you guys should watch the video if you ever think to look this up. You can find it on YouTube, but they burn with kind of ferocity and intensity that we have no real parallels for anywhere else. The amount of fuel, the quantities. This is guinea grass, so a little bit bigger than, say, buffalo grass that burned up around Lahaina, for example, but still really difficult for firefighters to manage, and nothing's really being done before the fires ignite. And just to give a sense of scale, I think this is really important to understand, and something I never really thought about until I was working on fire. And this needs to be updated because this data is from about 2017, 2016, but Hawaiian ecosystems account for about 1.3 million acres. Total state land area is like 4 million acres, right? So, about the third of it or so, and that's all the purple, right? So whether you're shrubland, grassland, or forest, most of it's forest, and non-native ecosystems account for a little bit more of that. And within that 1.5 million acres, we're dealing with about 1 million acres, so a quarter of state land area that's dominated by these grasses and shrubs. So things like haolikoa, buffalo grass, guinea grass, a bunch of several grass species. And so it's big. And when we look at the area burned, right? So this is about a 20-year history, a little bit longer, of actual footprints of fires. It's about 85% of the area burned is happening in these grass-dominated, so these non-native ecosystems, right? So this is really the source of the problem on the landscape scale. So little bits are burning in forests. Hawaiian ecosystems are also affected, though, year in and year out. That of course varies. And this is what creates risk around our homes. Like, so around where we live, this is a community wildfire hazard assessment that was done around 2013. This could probably go for use an update that Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization did. And this is based on fuels around the community. It's based on exit, entrances and exit. Can you kind of get machinery in there? Is there water available? All of these things kind of go into this, but we can just see that risk is high, not just on West Maui, but pretty much on every island. We've got areas that are in high risk, under high threat. And kind of zooming in on Maui, this is the context in which we're looking at. So these are fuel maps. So this is what we actually, I've been working with staff in my program to update this. This is derived from satellite. So this was the fuels right before these fires happened. You can see the green is grass, the purple is the forest, essentially. And so we're really dealing with these grass-dominated ecosystems, and the footprint of both the Kula fire and Lahaina fire in this example, we're really in the middle of that grassland. And when we think about why these fuels look the way they do, we kind of think about longer-term history, right? So this is land use history, looking at agricultural land use in particular. So the green is abandoned sugarcane. Around Lahaina, that was Pioneer Mills that went out in 1999. And then kind of below Kula was HCNS that went out in 2016. And these are where these fires kind of rip through, and there's really not a lot being done on those landscapes. So when you pull agriculture off the land, it fills in with these non-native grasses. And unless you're actively managing it, but you can see even in the active pasture, we had fire progression as well. But these, there's a big difference between the fuels in these working landscapes and the fuels in these unmanaged abandoned sugarcane. And this is really what we're looking at of the longer term history. So we've got that fire history on the top, all right? So that's that annual area burned over time. And then the next two figures below, you can see pasture. So this is the decline in active land, area under active pasture management is the middle, and the bottom is total crops at the top, and then sugarcane and pineapple And so you can see as we move into the 60s, we get these huge declines, big declines in land area that's actively being farmed, essentially. And then that is really what's corresponding to this big increase in fire. And it forces us to really think about, what these landscapes looked like prior to the expansion of agriculture. Like, what are we dealing with? And I think the impacts of Lahaina has really brought this to the forefront of everyone's minds. In terms of the land use systems, land tenure, the ways in which we were using water in particular, and the ways in which we're using water and managing lands now. And so this whole graph and timeline encapsulates kind of the domination of plantation commodity agriculture. It moves into the sort of middle of last century when you have huge declines due to labor uprising and demand for higher wages, declining agricultural prices. And then really the attention shifts from corporate interest in managing for agriculture to managing for homes, real estate, tourism. And what we're left with is kind of the aftermath of these huge unmanaged tracts of land. And where we're actually putting our effort, this is 2 miles north of Lahaina, that lower picture. In Kanapali, you've got these verdant lawns, vanish-cured landscapes with water features. And meanwhile, the town to the south was destroyed. So this is really not a fire problem. It's a problem about fuels and land care in the bigger picture. And I'm kind of encouraged already by some of the discussion earlier about thinking, how do we manage these, the idea of fire sheds or watershed partnership models. And so, what should land care look like? What do we think about these lands? We have to deal with quite a lot of these areas that are dominated by grasses and shrubs. And so kind of what are our options? I'm not really here to tell you what we should be doing, but what we have already. We've got really big and solid social infrastructure, so relationships across agencies. I think the HISC is an example of this, and the invasive species committees. There's lots of examples. We've got a lot of plans. The community wildfire protection plans were brought up before. Those don't really spell out what we need to do, but it allows ideas for different projects that would be appropriate to different places, and lots of educational resources, a lot of spearheaded by Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization in partnership with Division of Forestry and Wildlife. And models, right? So the watershed partnerships provide good models for this, bringing different landowners together. But it's really important to keep in mind that despite these big footprints, these programs really center about, you have a coordinator and maybe 5 or 6 staff, right? So the actual investment in those programs is pretty limited. And it's hard for them to have these big impacts that we need to see for reducing fire risk. A lot of science and technology fundamentals are there, high resolution fire history. We've got risk maps that I've been developing. All this to say is we can really identify where risk is high and what are some of the best practices we could be doing in these places. And we've got a lot of local knowledge to do management, to manage the vegetation. We just need to do it at scale. So we can see examples of this on the ground. This is from Waianae. You've got Eric Enos at Kala Farm, who's restoring low-E to act as fire breaks. He's got sheep going. The picture to the left is a Dofa green strip. So the kind of side of the road that did not burn in this picture is replanted with native vegetation along the roadside to prevented that fire from jumping the road, for example, here. It's just we need to do this at scale. And then grazing, and the more and more we look at the scale of the problem and the tools and the labor available to us, I think this is really going to be one of the key strategies for us to do these things at scale and do things effectively. And so weeds versus resources, right? Like what do we look, the way do we look at these landscapes? And I think when we think about the language that we're using in these kind of resolutions, like we need to be specific about what's appropriate for what parts of the landscape. And again, like how do we manage these things effectively at scale, these species at scale? Again, coming back to this, it's 1 million acres. And when we look at the relevance of grazing and the extent of it, this is the current extent, at least that was mapped, I think in 2015, right? So it's a pretty big footprint. This is not to say that everywhere this is happening, it's the best thing for that place or being done in the best way, but we have a group of people who have a lot of knowledge about managing large lands and a lot of resources in the terms of people and animals. And so this is gonna, again, it needs water, it needs fencing, it needs investment, but this is something that we can build off of. And we need to ally with folks that have this knowledge if we want to tackle this. It's just so big. And I don't need to like dwell on these, but we can look at a lot of other things that we need and kind of specify not only what the action is, but just how effective it's going to be, how fast we can implement it, and then how much it's going to cost. And so I presented this to the it was the House of Representatives Working Group on Wildland Fire, and just as a sense of like, what can we spell out? What are the things that we need? So, community action, so improving retrofitting homes. This is a big one, actually. We can do a lot for home safety just by dealing on properties, and homeowners can take actions themselves. A lot that needs to be done with these fuels. And you've kind of got these options on the table, and they range in terms of effectiveness, right? So, and cost, right? So redoing agriculture, reestablishing agriculture is not going to burn. Fuel breaks, for example, might be effective under most conditions, but when you have high winds, right, you have fires that jump roads and jump fuel breaks. Grazing, similarly, maybe not effective always, but it's going to be much more inexpensive to implement. It can be done at large scale. So there's all these different strategies, green breaks and restoration, things like that. Utility actions, right? So you asked about MECO earlier. What are the things that they can do? You can manage lands sort of around the utility lines. San Diego, which has a public utility, just buried the lines, and they haven't had these large incidents since they've done that. Restoration, we need to think about water resources for any of the strategies to do fuels management. Depowering, I don't want to get into that. That's not the best option here. But anyway, we can start thinking about and pointing towards specific actions. We need regulation, we need enforcement. This is stuff that I know that the House of Representatives is working on, and codes are being looked at and re-examined at the county level. But what resources do we have to enforce these actions? And what kind of funds do we have, right, to sort of even recover from fire after areas do burn? Mililani fire that happened just after Maui is a good example of that. Like, not a lot of prevention work that you can do in those kinds of environments. And then we just need more investment in land care. It's pretty simple. We need to get the resources and personnel in place to do cross-boundary planning. I think Rob described it very well earlier. When the sort of complexity of the landscapes around our communities. So it's lots of private owners, different mixes of land uses. So this might require a different group than the watershed partnerships, but a similar model would work. Public education, funding for the agencies that are in place already, and increased firefighting resources. This aligns a lot with what DOFA had presented before. And we've got other science and technology stuff we're already working on. So what kind of water resources are out there? What's their condition? We're working with the Army Natural Resource Program and actually OHA right now to put in proposals for plant materials development. So producing seed at scale so we can respond post-fire, but also have materials for green strips, things like that. And what species are we using? We're also trying to develop, at least solicit information about species selection for green breaks from the landscaping industry and from restoration professionals to be able to make recommendations. And then the fire assessment and mapping, which has been underway at small scale, but this is something that we have to get going on this statewide and look where these actions need to happen. And yeah, with that, it's kind of like we've got a lot of resources to build from. I just love this map. Kepa Meli put this together. It's the Mahele maps pre-development in Lahaina, and it just shows what this landscape was. And if you had all of this land under active agriculture, under active use, we would not have had the disaster that we experienced. It's really simple, but really it's going to take a lot of work to implement. So, and with that, I'll leave it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah. Questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Yeah.
And forgive my ignorance, is the conversation on, or there are two categories, whether it's native or invasive, or is there a other?
Non-native or invasive. I think that there is a distinction in the sense that invasive tends to be things that would like actively or aggressively sort of displace native, whereas you can have a non-native tree, like a street tree, like rainbow shower or something, that's not going to be cause a problem, and it's not naturalizing and moving up into the forest. So Yeah, I think the challenge, and I've talked a lot about this with Christy and Chelsea, for example, is when you have these grasses that are invasive in a natural area, right? We don't want to see guinea grass moving up into native ecosystems, but then it's sort of already dominant in these lowland areas. What are our options realistically to deal with that? And I think the language is, it's a sensitive topic, because if I talk to a grazer and I start saying that these are invasive weeds, they look at me like, what are you talking about?
But it's highly nutritious forage.
Right. So
Right.
it's a challenge. And, I don't know what the easy answer to sort of define that, how you define that.
And so I'm also hearing then that one of the solutions really is we need infrastructure to process all of these bio lawnmowers that we need, because we're going to have a bunch of sheep to help us manage, but we have no place currently to do anything with them.
Well, yeah, I would say though that the number of animals is not getting the number of animals we need is the first problem, like processing
They kind of
them.
do that on their own a little bit, right?
Well, again,
There's
and
some natural processes there.
There's some maybe cattle folk that have more knowledge of this than I do. But for example, one of the guys that we have worked with on the Big Island, who does, he's done sheep and goat grazing in native forests to reduce fuel loads. He just puts his old animals out. He doesn't harvest them at all. And so this is something that we need to build capacity for. So we're not at the problem of like, oh my God, there's too many cows out there. The deer, on the other hand, that's a
Right.
whole other question.
Right.
But that's also, you have to understand that there's a difference also between wild ungulates and wild animals, because those are not being directed towards strategically reducing fuels. And so it's very clearly shown in the literature that you need to direct animals strategically in order to have the effect that you want to achieve. I mean, when you get to the numbers that we're seeing, I mean, it may be that they're reducing risk as it is, but from what we've seen, and actually a student of mine worked on this, is they don't tend to reduce risk in the areas that it's needed most. They like to stay where it's nice and green, typically, not dry.
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, and thank you. I'm happy to hear this, that you're working on this subject
Yeah.
matter, coming from Lahaina, born and raised, and
Yeah, sure.
having survived the fire myself, and knowing the history from, right, sugarcane. We never had, they used to burn sugarcane right
Right.
next to our homes, and not one home caught fire. But I know, not sure if you're aware that Councilmember Gabe Johnson is trying to create like a tiered taxation to incentivize, the fallow land, agricultural landowners to put that to agricultural use,
Right.
not just to address our food security, but obviously to green up our
Right.
land. So are you aware, working with that type of efforts?
I have
to
not been tied
support?
into, but I'd be happy to provide support.
Yeah, I think they just voted on it yesterday. So
Okay.
it's something very new.
Yeah.
It just came up on my phone,
Right.
but, so yeah, I think that's definitely key. I know that it looks like state and a lot of different, Ofish County perhaps, are really going to town on cleaning up our roadsides,
Yeah.
cleaning, maybe.
No, the
you know,
DOT has been really proactive and is working with the county fire departments to sort of figure out where they should start and how to, to really start clearing. Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges too with the fuels management, I think DOFA folks could speak to this, is that, if you just start mowing, we need to be thinking about long-term strategy too, because you just get in this endless cycle. And in a lot of the places they're doing fuels management, you're mowing grass multiple times a year, 2 to 3 times at least, because it just comes back with every little rain event. So they provide lots of examples where they're kind of shifting towards changing the fuels to something else. It also comes back to animals might be a little bit more efficient in where it's appropriate, right?
I think there's already a follow-up.
Yeah.
There's already ordinances on the county books to
Yeah.
force private landowners to take
Yeah.
care of their shoulders and fire breaks and what have you. It's just the implementation and enforcing those.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I did do a pilot program about goats, because learning from Hawaii Island, how AXA is trying to stop the need for spraying pesticides.
Right.
And that we showed that this can work along the
Totally.
roadways, and the goats, it's a win-win, right? For the goat owner
Yeah.
and the people who own the land, and obviously to abate fire.
Yeah.
So I'm very supportive of those efforts.
Yeah,
And,
agreed.
look forward to us moving forward on that, because Lahaina, definitely, we gotta change our landscape.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, thanks
Yeah.
for sharing. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Representative Martin.
Mahalo, Chair. Dr. Charnich, I emailed you and you responded, thank you for that, about the DOE land, which I would like to see them get under management. Have they reached out to you?
Not yet, no.
Okay. They may not have the bandwidth right now to even think about their extra unmanaged land. In which case I might try to reach out to you to be proactive on their behalf to try to come up with something.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat. Just related to that briefly, there's a couple projects that just got funded on Maui. I think one is through UH Maui to kind of look, they're going to start with Lahaina Luna, but to look at, again, this is not going to take care of all these unmanaged lands around, but at least to work with the schools to start integrating native plant propagation into like the school garden program so that they can start actually working on the school grounds to plant natives and change some of the fuels, at least within the school grounds. So again, really early stages there. But.
Okay, I would love to learn more about that to see if that could be a model for all of their campuses. I have a question about immediately after a fire, when there is this opportunity that invasives have been burned to get something else established. Is there, I do plant natives and I know how slowly a lot of them grow. Is there like any strategy to having like bridge populations, like, I don't know, Bermuda grass or something as a bridge, like a short grass that doesn't have a lot of fuel, so then you can plant natives?
Yeah, it's a really, I think that's kind of the $1 million question right now. I mean, there's, so we work with a contractor, Taylor Marsh, who's been experimenting with hydromulch mixes to respond post-fire. And with natives, but now he's also playing around with different cover crops. So stuff that people use to improve soil, agricultural soils. One of the challenges that he's experienced so far is that when our grasslands, typically they're grassy fields, when they burn, it burns through so quickly that most of the rootstock is left intact and you've got a seed bank that's already established. And so you're kind of racing or competing with those established plants. And so that we found even in those cases that the best success is you have to like spot spray and treat the grass actually, because you can't really put in down seed or other plants that it's just gonna be outcompeted. So yeah, the jury's still out, but I think that in these sort of wildland, that like areas closer to communities, we should be definitely experimenting and thinking about not necessarily native plants. Maybe it's mixed, but you know, other landscaping species. And we've actually put a survey out there right now that we're trying to get input about species selection for you know, converting vegetation with not necessarily native species, but other species as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Please.
Thank you for your presentation.
No problem.
I always learn something new, even from multiple times hearing this presentation. Just a question on seed banking, seed collection, plant propagation.
Yeah.
We know many different groups work on this.
Yeah.
And collectively, we need some facilitation to get to scale in certain times of need, or also seed collect and seed bank for long-term for emergency response. We know the military has maybe the larger seed bank. I guess what, from the research you've done and what you know on the ground, how do we get there in that space? Because there's a lot of people doing it across the state in various growth scale spaces. And so how do we get folks talking? Is it island coalitions? Is there a statewide coalition? How do we coalesce all that great work to create that, I guess, scale mobilization in time of need, or thinking for future emergency response and also recovery efforts of Lahaina?
Yeah, so there's two efforts. There's a couple efforts to mention. One, I was helping there. So we've got, there's a seed bank partnership So that's the active seed bank. So you like Lion Arboretum, the Army Environmental Program, Maui Nui Botanical Garden. So folks that have seed bank facilities, seed storage facilities. And we had worked with them, we being folks with Division of Forestry and Wildlife, as well as Army Natural Resource Program. We put a survey together on plant material needs, specifically dealing with native plants, because that was kind of the interest at the time. This was before Maui, we actually initiated this. And so we actually just closed that survey. So trying to understand like where are the barriers for plant materials, seed availability, where are people collecting from? So that's going to be really critical just to establish where the bottlenecks are. And then the next step really, as far as I can see it, as far as what I've been learning from everyone, is that we need to move towards like seed production, seed farms essentially. And so that would require just some standards to not only figure out how do you kind of maximize genetic diversity, and it has to be per island, because you want it regional, right? Like it has to be from Big Island or even from, one side of the mountain versus the other. And so, yeah, it's like, how do you present the kind of method to do it, which is something we've been working on. Army Natural Resource Program has a little bit of headway on here. Some folks have been doing their own things here and there. But I think we've been developing a strategy to basically a best practice. So maintain genetic diversity. The other big part of this that is complicated, I think, but doable, is like, how do you determine who gets access to the seed and who controls the seed? Because the seed becomes capital, like very literally. And these programs, there's tribal groups on the mainland, for example, who are using their growing native seed, and then they're able to use it for matching funds. They negotiate projects with contractors. So it can become really a powerful way for community groups to take action. So those two items, I think, are where we need to go. But I can let you know, we're gonna work on the results of this survey and kind of establish like what will be the next steps for a seed strategy for the state, essentially.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. You were mentioning about all the different watershed partnerships, and we have quite a few in West Maui, and Maui as a whole, and the lack of funding, the need for workers, manpower, what have you. And I know this isn't a new term, but volunteerism.
Oh, yeah.
So in particular for Lahaina, I mean, during the disaster relief, efforts, and people coming from all over the world, literally, or other islands, what have you, specifically to help in any way, shape, or form. And I think having them be part of this, regreening, regrowing, and all those efforts, they'd more than happy to want to jump in, because it's preventative measures for the future, and to be a part of it. So I think if there's a way to tie into our tourism industry and, have them do something productive, they want to be a part of. I'll tell you, I get calls and, emails and texts all day long. How can we help? How can we help? Right. And I think in these sort of efforts, they're like, I brought my boots, I brought my, hiking gear. I want to go up there and help. And so that definitely, there's a population of people who want to jump in and assist with all of that. That goes for DOFA and everybody. The other thing is, that Kepa Mali, Matt possibly showed this, but West Maui once upon a time had 33 free flowing streams. Yeah. Right. We were the Venice of the Pacific, and the Moku'ula Mokuhimia. I go back now to Waiola Church, which is right next door, and nothing touched that graveyard. Right. And it's got grass, it's got plumeria trees, it's got coconuts, it's got all those ulu and tea and everything, and it's like the shari trees along the median and the highway are still there. Of course the banyan trees coming back. It's just my home thankfully is intact, and I got like a major jungle growing around my yard. Yeah. I created a high maintenance nightmare after COVID, but I think that helped save. Yeah. Because the fires were flying everywhere around me, but it did not come near all the greenery. Yeah. And so I know the importance of having us green up everything once again, but we have to incentivize and make sure that people understand not just, yes, economic, possibly food security, two efforts, but that these landowners need to take, that's their kuleana. Yeah. Period. Yeah. And as you're saying, the unmanaged invasive grasses, which is now blackened now. Yeah. We need to get back to that. And green it up. with good stuff,
Yeah.
you know. I mean,
Yeah, no, it's a lot to be done. That can be done at the household level, which is the other thing about fire that's kind of empowering. And a lot of the action that we see is actually with these Firewise communities and programs, is actions to take at the household level. And the only other thing I would add is that I can't remember, it's IHBS, it's insurance home. There's this nonprofit that they do disaster research, so post-disaster research. And so I know that they have reached out to folks at SOAS. They do, any time there's a disaster like this fire in particular that damages homes, they do assessments post-fire. And I know one of the goals of that program is to understand, you know, of the houses that didn't burn, like what was the vegetation, what was the building components, things like that. So there'll be, I think, many resources after the fact of sort of what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, bananas work.
Yeah.
Bananas are probably one of the trees that came back in everyone's yards.
Yeah.
No matter how devastated, it's the bananas. I'm like, whoa, amazing. I had no idea.
Yeah.
They carry so much water.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you for your
presentation.
No problem.
Any public testimony? Please come on up.
There's also one online too, Nicole.
Oh, okay.
Hi,
Hi.
good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today, committee. My name is Taylor Kellerman. I am the Director of Diversified Agriculture and Land Stewardship for Kuloa Ranch. I am also the Chair of the Hawaii Rangeland Stewardship Foundation, and I'm speaking to you today under the capacity of the Land and Water Chair for the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council. As the presentation before kind of outlined, we are stewards of close to 750,000 acres of grasslands in the state of Hawaii. We do definitely have deep care and concern about how we move forward with this issue, and we would like to be considered partners and, you know, retain a seat at the table. We do definitely want to make sure that we carry forward in the proper way, but do feel that as cattlemen, we do have a responsibility as well as a opportunity to have a co-benefit of local food production along with the fuel load control that Clay outlined earlier, being that that is one of the few things that we do have the ability to control. And I just stand by the written testimony that we submitted earlier, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other public testimony?
One person online.
Oh, yep. Nicole Galassi, welcome.
Thank you so much. Nicole Galassi, I'm the Managing Director for the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council. I just want to tag on to what Taylor presented. Dr. Charnett, I really appreciate you pointing out land use and land tenure because management of the land really is key in ensuring those fire fuel loads are controlled. You did mention that 1 million acres are in grasslands, and that's where most of the fires are happening. Like Taylor said, I want to point out that a little over 750,000 of those acres are in pasture. So these are managed areas. And so if we do have limited resources, which we do, the spots that we would probably get the most effective outcomes from is focusing on that 250,000 acres to ensure that those are managed and to prioritize the ones that are near urban areas, that urban wildland interface that we talk about. Prioritize those to make sure that they are being managed. If they're state leases, they get leased out to people who are going to manage the areas. Because grazing can be a tool. It can be used at scale, but it is a matter of being able to fence the animals in, to manage them, and also looking at the land tenure. And that's the type of facilitation that I think is needed to make sure these lands get managed, whether it's in ranching or in forestry, in conservation, whatever the best use is. So thank you. I appreciate being able to speak.
Thank you. Okay, any other public testimony? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation again.
Thanks.
And we'll move on now to agenda item number 8, which is an action item, and Chelsea Arnott will summarize the submittal and we'll read the recommendation.
Yeah, mahalo, Chair, and mahalo for that presentation that sets up this next agenda item. Just give me a sec, I will pull up our sheet. So we are requesting the Hawaii Invasive Species Council adopt a resolution that recognizes the role of invasive plants as it relates to wildfire in Hawaii and supporting recommendations for the prevention and post-recovery efforts to mitigate future impacts. The Hawaii Invasive Species Council statute, our purpose is really policy direction and statewide coordination for the prevention and management of invasive species. And one way the council achieves this is by introducing and adopting resolutions. We have a history of adopting various resolutions, especially when there are issues that impact multiple sectors and departments. Wildfire is definitely one of those, as we just heard in the previous presentation. And I should make sure that everyone knows that this isn't a management plan, and this isn't the council going forward saying this is how we're going to deal with this problem. It is recommendations specifically towards reducing the impacts of invasive species, and specifically for this resolution, invasive plants. This resolution has gone through review by various partners and agencies to make sure that the language reflects the issues and also brings up concerns, some that were brought up by the Cattlemen's Association that you heard, the utility of non-native grasses in some of these ranching and other economic industries, and making sure that we recognize that there is a utility for some of these grasses. And so what I'm going to do, because it's really important and the language is important, is actually read through the recommendations for the council. And sorry, you're going to hear my voice drone on for a while here. So the recommendation of this resolution is that the Hawaii Invasive Species Council adopt a resolution substantially similar to the attached draft, which is included in your meeting packet, and that this recognizes the prevention, management, and control of invasive plants must be prioritized to mitigate future wildfire threats and improve Hawaii's climate resiliency for the protection and health of communities, native species, businesses, and industries, and way of life in the islands. That it supports a holistic approach for land use planning, including fire codes and taxation policies, to incentivize risk reduction and enhance ecosystem services and public well-being. That includes identifying support mechanisms that empower ranchers and local agricultural producers to reduce existing fuel loads, while also meeting food security goals and setting aside land for fire buffers around communities, using low fire risk crops, and considering the use of biocontrol strategies for landscape level control. This is a process that does take into consideration economic and ecological implications, as well as potential impacts to critical industries. Further recommending using native plants or non-native plants that are low risk of becoming invasive for revegetation efforts whenever feasible, and that local seed sources are used whenever possible to reduce the risk of new invasive plant introductions, amplifying the production of locally appropriate native seed and other plant materials to provide adequate resources for post-fire recovery and fuels conversion projects to reduce fire risk, sourcing organic materials for erosion control and revegetation. Sorry, I had to move something real quick. Revegetation from on-island sources, and ensuring if a local source is not available, that material is inspected or treated before transport to the site for invasive species. This is particularly important for invasive pests like coconut rhinoceros beetle that can travel on green waste and mulch and compost and little fire ants. And further, not recommend revegetating or creating fire breaks with plants that are considered invasive or high risk by the Hawaii Pacific Weed Risk Assessment and the Weed Fire Risk Assessment tools, both of which are scientifically established and validated methods for assessing a plant's risk of invasion or being fire promoting, respectively. And with that, I will leave those recommendations for the council's consideration and any further questions or comments.
Okay, questions from council members?
Chair, are you looking for a motion to adopt this resolution?
Let's see, do we receive any testimony?
We did receive testimony from the Hawaii Cattlemen's Association, and I'm not sure if others that are online or in the room would want to testify.
Yeah, maybe we'll get the public testimony first, excuse me. Any testifiers? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council just wants to stand on our testimony. We just commented and we do support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so coming, oh, yes, go ahead. Come on up. Excuse me.
Hello, Christy Martin, Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. I did have a conversation with some folks at NRCS, and I just wanted to suggest that, and noting from, there is an executive order on invasive species for federal agencies, and it says whenever possible, federal agencies should not recommend, promote, plant, or spread invasive species, but they leave that possible necessary use, that whenever possible. And I just wanted to leave the door open, a crack for your consideration of such language. It is not nearly as strong. And I apologize to Chelsea for not like springing this on you. But I did want to just make sure that we consider that there may conceivably be a time where we are absolutely desperate and we have to use something that's invasive. And I just wanted to leave that door open. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes, go
I
ahead.
move that we adopt the resolution before us that Chelsea has read to us. I think the term whenever feasible is in item 3A, where it says whenever feasible, excuse me. And I think that, and it does allow for non-native plants that are at low risk of becoming invasive. So I think we have both the guardrails and the flexibility there when the situation requires very rapid action. So anyway, so I move to adopt the resolution.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Excuse me.
I second. Sorry, I was waiting. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, moving on. Excuse me, I think I just need to.
Sure. No, I can take number 9. Moving on to agenda item 9, recommendations from council members on topics for future HISC meetings and time frame. So are there future topics that need to be included for the next council meeting? Yes, please.
Member Kishida, I'd like to see an update on the work of the Hawaii Ant Lab to support constraint and eradication of the little fire ant.
Heard. Excellent, thank you. Any other members? Topics that we should include in the next meeting?
Axis deer.
Access deer. Sure. Thank you.
Not sure if we're going to do this, but just maybe an update on where we stand with the biosecurity plan.
Well,
Yep.
Dexter, we did the Finn site inspections with biosecurity and those efforts, and just I feel so bad because they need so much more help, and to tackle the avoiding invasives from coming into our islands. Where are we on that, like,
Okay, so port
look-
security.
Yeah, port security efforts, funding that need to be had or whatever. I mean, I think we should vet that through and figure out where we could tap resources, because it's a scary situation we're in. FedEx that day wouldn't allow us to go in and see their operations, and they were pulling in 40,000 packages, and that was not even this time of year where they said it quadruples because of the holiday season, and nothing's inspected. That just, we can't have that. So
Understood. Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Any members online? Any suggestions? If not, I'm not sure if we can figure out a time frame for the next meeting, but maybe generally, are we looking at January through March? Are we looking at after legislative season? Since we may be just a bit busy, or this room will be at least, I think. So maybe after May sometime. Are we looking at June? Or is fiscal year end insane for most of us? July 1, July 4th? Are we thinking maybe? My calendar is free on July 4th for some reason.
Maybe we should ask our staff to
Coordinate?
yes.
Okay, we can definitely do that. We will have our HISC staff coordinate with our staff, but definitely after May. Any other testimony on this agenda item from either online or in person regarding topics that should be covered at the next HISC meeting, which will be sometime after May? Please.
I'll hold myself, I wasn't going to do this. But
Oh, we'll just shut the mic off
I
then.
know.
No.
I know, right? Yeah, strike it from the notes. Christy Martin, Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. My suggestion would actually be to consider inviting the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam commander to present an update or share what his needs are for Umilnia. Thank you.
Thank you. Great idea. Anyone else, either online or in person? Hearing none. Any additional testimony or testifiers at this time? A topic that we may not have covered. Hearing none. Chair, now that you're back, would you like to do the honors?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dexter. Okay. So we will move to adjourn. The time now is 2:56. Does this council usually vote to adjourn, or we just declare it to be so?
It's not required, but if somebody wanted to.
No, we'll just declare it to be so. So meeting adjourned.
I
Thank you.
love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for covering there.
Not a problem.